Okay, so welcome everyone. 5:15 on a Monday. That is the time for our Geoscience Colloquium Keynote. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all in 2021 for our first keynote lecture in this colloquium series. My name is Simon Schneider. I'm the coordinator of the research focus area Earth System Sciences here at the University in Potsdam. And it's a great pleasure to say hello to our global audience today. Before we start, please let me remind you of some rules for this visual keynote presentation. I would ask you all to mute your microphones. This will help us to have the keynote presentation streamed in the best quality, and we will unmute microphones later for question and answers after the keynote presentation. I will also remind you that we will record this presentation. Due to German privacy issues and privacy guidelines, I will stop the recording after the keynote, so the Q&A will not be recorded, only the presentation. Today's keynote lecture will be given by John Geissman. Hello, John. The presentation will cover issues and topics concerning geoethics. Geoethics, I think, is something which gained attention by the earth science community over the last couple of years and is still kind of underrepresented. So we are very happy to have John here today giving this presentation. For many years now, John is highly committed to geoethics. He is strongly supportive of applying the concepts of integrity and ethics in sciences. He has also been an editor in various international renowned journals for the Geological Society of America and the American Geophysical Union, and I think many others. He is also an engaged board member of numerous scientific organizations, and we met in one of these committees at the American Geophysical Union, so I know that he is a very engaged and motivated board member. He has also been a past president of the Geological Society of America, and he is a fellow of the GSA as well as of AGU. I would be able to praise John's contributions to sciences for the next hour, but this is not the idea of this presentation. So we are talking about geoethics, and this is my keyword to hand the presentation over to John. Welcome, John.
All right. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Edward. Greetings to all of you from New Mexico, and I will share my screen now and add a few more comments. And okay, so thanks to all of you for being here. This is quite a treat. Thank you for the very kind introduction, Simon. A very warm and passionate Happy New Year to all of you. Let us hope that 2021 is much more positive from a number of different perspectives. And in that context, this is a wonderful topic to talk about in that context of thinking positive and moving forward, but not just from any singular representation, but all of humanity from a global perspective. And but I must confess, and I'll give you a little bit of what's going on right now. Were you in the United States at this very moment, and you had a brain, that thing in between your ears, you'd be very, very concerned about this week in the history of our country. And many of you know what I'm referring to. So if I sound a little bit distracted, I think that I have a brain, and therefore I'm allowed to be very, very concerned about what might happen this week in this country. And in that context, geoethics and ethics enter into that concern to a very, very great degree. Besides this being recorded, I'm more than happy to send this presentation to Simon and to Edward for any of your perusal, or just contact me and I can send it to you or give you a link to where it's located. So with that in mind, I know all of you really, really love word slides. Yeah, I'm being facetious here. Bottom line here is that I think an essential element of this discussion is that the topic of geoethics deserves a place in the classroom at a variety of different levels. There are so many opportunities to talk about this topic from an educational perspective. And in this context, I'm talking about and addressing those of you students out there in terms of your current and future experiences. Much of this discussion is going to be focused, admittedly, on issues related to higher education and ethics and integrity in science. And in that context, I'm going to refer to higher education as the quote unquote the academy. I've had, from something of a personal perspective, having been a department chair, a department head, involved at a variety of different levels at a number of institutions in terms of faculty governance, I'll be the first to confess that I've seen some actions by a number of colleagues that in my humble opinion would have warranted their immediate termination. But they didn't happen, unfortunately. And this is part of the problem that the global community and the academy is trying to address. And we're beginning to pay a lot more attention to this. Okay. So just as a little bit of a background here in terms of what we are talking about in terms of geoethics, as Carl Sagan back a few decades ago remarked about that pale blue dot, we live on a remarkable chunk of real estate, right? And all of you, of course, certainly appreciate that and certainly recognize it. If you like rainbows, our chunk of real estate's got spectacular rainbows. If you like mountains, and many of you, of course, do, I prefer them in dry, arid climates. I'm not a very good cold weather person. So this is a chunk of real estate close by to my home. Another favorite place where I've been working a lot is in South Africa. This is Compassberg, the second highest peak in Southern Africa. Again, in a warm, arid climate. And if you like other views, you like other settings, you like the perhaps mixture of the human element and the geologic element, there's not much more pleasing than some spectacular vineyard in Mosul or in Western California or South Africa or Italy for our Italian colleagues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that wonderful sort of spirit of the importance of terroir as these spectacular liquids are produced by human beings. So, all of these give us this sort of appreciation of the wonderful home on which we live, and the importance then of geoethics in the kinds of things that we do on an active and regular basis. Oh, and speaking of this view and speaking of terroir, given that it's late in the day for all of you, I see nothing wrong with you opening one and enjoying a glass as the rest of this presentation goes on. It's a little early for me to do that. This is a view from South Africa's version of Costco, or I don't know what you call it, forgive me, in Germany, but, never mind. One of my favorite individuals who fortunately remains alive on this planet is His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And so this is a recent quotation of his in the context of the issue of climate change, and how all of us are completely intertwined and completely together on this great matter that faces all of humanity, and it will continue to face all of humanity in the future, as we very, very well know. We are in this together. So geoethics. If you go to the website, the IAPG, International Association for Promoting Geoethics website, you will read a lot about what geoethics entails and what is involved. It's an emerging discipline, as Simon has mentioned. It has drawn the attention of individuals world over in the context of the importance of geoethics and how geoethics links up with a number of other disciplines. But at the same time, how the geoscience community provides sort of a unique perspective on this field in the context of our appreciation, our knowledge, and our respect of deep time. That a lot of members of our planet don't necessarily have a full appreciation of. And I won't say anything more about the over 50% of the individuals in our country who would not even like to think about deep time. And before I go any further, it's clear and it's very, very important and very pertinent to recognize two individuals who have really led the charge well over a decade on this issue of geoethics, and that's Silvia Papaloni and Giuseppe Di Capua. Here they are, their smiling faces, wonderful individuals, great spirits. They may be out there in the audience, I don't know, but hi. This is a recent paper of theirs. It's readily downloadable from the Geological Society of London, and if you can't, just email me. I strongly urge each and every one of you to read it and reread it and use aspects of it in your classroom. Send it out to your students. It is a spectacular and moving and very, very, very timely read. As a matter of fact, a significant section of this paper is actually devoted to sort of the current issue that we have in terms of the global pandemic and how it relates to geoethics and our approach to dealing with this pandemic and solving it in the future. And so it's not just geoscientists who should read this, in my humble opinion. If certain individuals in charge of certain things in this country read it, maybe things would be different. Two spectacular diagrams in this paper. I highlight parts of them. They're really great in the sense of showing all of the linkages that are involved in geoethics. And I highlight the issues of responsibility, of values, of virtuous behavior. And these are the kinds of things that I will talk about briefly in this presentation in the context of the role of the professoriate, if you will, in higher education, and the responsibilities and the values and the virtuous behavior that we should have in front of our students. And before I forget, I meant to mention this earlier. If you look carefully at these diagrams, here, this is the first one, here is the second, involving a variety of different components. You begin to recognize that what Silvia and Giuseppe have done in these diagrams is very, very in sync with our current discussion. And by our, I mean not just the geoscience community, but community, scientific and sociological and economic communities at large, this current discussion about the importance of the Anthropocene, which I'm sure all of you have heard about. This is a topic that is being discussed at a very, very wide range of levels in the context of just, what we are doing right now on this planet. Okay, enough on that. So in the context of the academy, these kinds of images are tough to bring up, but you don't take the truth and sweep them under the carpet. The academy has been the site of a lot of, in my humble opinion, a lot of bad behavior. I've witnessed it over and over. Some of you, I'm sure, have witnessed it over and over and over. This is a situation that has to change, that has to be dealt with. The question is, how do we deal with it? And I think that I have a few, well, sort of answers, but also some comments on what is being done now to try to prevent things like this from happening in the future. You know, at the same time that we look at all of these troublesome things that have gone on in the academy from a global perspective, we also, of course, recognize, you know, the issues that are facing us, facing all of us in a global perspective right now. This slide is like 6 or 7 years old. I could have picked newspaper topics, et cetera, just from the last week or so. And they're saying the exact same thing, of course. Things have not, I hate to say it, improved. Although with the global pandemic, you know, we have noticed that certain human activities have slowed down, but yeah. Just a little bit of background, and I don't want to dwell on this. Simon already very, very nicely provided an introduction, but you know, and not to go into any of this, but I've always had this passion about the importance of the academy in the sense of not only training students, but also reaching out and being an important component of society and making certain that what we do is societally relevant and important and engaging to all members of society. More on that in just a moment or two. And as part of my background, a long time ago, when I looked a lot different, I sat in a classroom in the fall of 1969 at the University of Michigan with over 700 students being taught introductory physical geology. This is at a time when the plate tectonic revolution was, you know, really just getting going. And I had that man in the classroom as my instructor. Frank Rhodes, who's president of Cornell University for over 30 years, and a tremendous spokesperson for higher education, not just in the United States, but world over. Remarkable individual. Sorry. I still have my notes from that class. I still remember every single lecture. Can you imagine? Well, now he's passed, just like Frank, but can you imagine a Sean Connery who is actually really, really, really intelligent, who could communicate science to 700 people in the classroom? You could hear a pin drop in that classroom when Frank Rhodes walked into it. And, you know, up until a short time ago, we remained close friends. He would email me when he saw an accomplishment of mine and vice versa. Read this book if you have the chance, The Creation of the Future. He's written several books, including the last few on climate change and global sustainability issues. Remarkable man. So that was part of my past experience as well. The flip side, not to belabor this, but when I was a master's student, one of my close colleagues as a master's student got a lot of notoriety in the geosciences, not necessarily positive notoriety. He invented 5 different fictitious fake minerals, published on each and every one of them in reputable geoscience journals. These were totally fraudulent, and eventually it was demonstrated that they were totally fraudulent. But what drives an individual? There he is, right down, yeah, I think I can, there he is right now in later years. What drives such an individual? And one of his prize mineral specimens still sits in the rotunda of the state of Texas Capitol in Austin, Texas. You got to wonder. Okay, so I may be doing a number of digressions. You got to forgive me here, but this is an important topic we're talking about, in my humble opinion. This is a really, really important topic. And to put something from the past right now into the future, right now to the present, I can't think of a better way of doing this to go back to a classic movie that perhaps some of you have seen, All the President's Men. You know, good old Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman and Jason Robards, all key players in that movie. There's a scene in that movie at about 3 in the morning in the front yard of Robards, who's the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, who plays the editor, Ben Bradlee. And here's Ben Bradlee talking to Woodward and Bernstein. We're under a lot of pressure, you know, and you put us there, Robards says. Nothing is riding on this except the First Amendment, the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country. That kind of sounds like this week, eh? Not that any of that matters, but if you guys fuck up again, I'm going to get mad. Good night. That's the kind of seriousness, in my humble opinion, I place on the importance of this issue. So what drives people to do less than ethical things that define scientific integrity? One can come up with a lot of answers or attempt to come up with a lot of answers, and I don't want to dwell on them right now. I think I have some of the answers, but the key question is, you know, how do you stop such behavior? What can prevent it in the first place? Another lot of word slides, but this one, I'm not making any of this up. These are exact quotations that I've heard faculty colleagues spout out of their mouths. And I don't want to belabor these, but say, for example, when I first started out in the academy quite some time ago, the individual who was in charge of the field geology class sat down with a number of us, the other instructors, the other 3 instructors, and said, let me remind you that no woman is going to get a grade higher than a B in this class, and I don't care what the circumstances are. And so on and so on and so on. The lower one here, this is when I'm department chair. I watched a student comes into me, a PhD student, and says, earlier this afternoon, I watched my advisor delete about 50% of my data points from a key figure for a manuscript my advisor had been pressuring me to submit as soon as possible. I was told the graph would look better, quote unquote. And there's more, of course. I've had the experience of existing with some real bona fide narcissistic sociopaths, if I have to, fully admit it. And then we go back to this, one of the issues affecting higher education right now is this whole matter of sexual harassment that pervades, unfortunately, the sciences to one degree or another and must end and must be dealt with as soon as absolutely possible. So solutions. I think part of the solution is that we fail to forget aspects of the past and how important it is to be a member of the academic community. And I'm not talking about just the individual faculty, the instructors. I'm talking about everyone, the students, the staff, etc. So here's a great story, and this is not a story. In 1948, Dwight Eisenhower, who of course was commander-in-chief of the Allied forces during World War II in the European front, became president of Columbia University. Interesting appointment. But anyway, he asked to meet with the faculty of Columbia University. And so in that meeting, he starts off the meeting by saying, quote unquote, now, you employees of Columbia University. And he's talking, but at the same time, this little gentleman, about all of 5'4", stands up in the audience and politely says, Mr. President, we are Columbia University. This is a very, very famous Nobel laureate physicist, Isidor Itzhak Rabi, who actually became Eisenhower's science advisor. But his point was that it's the human beings who represent, who define the nature of the institution. So that's an important point to remember. You are the face of your institution. And another point about history, this one's a little bit farther back, 1915. This is a time period in the United States and in many other countries in the world where there was, of course, a lot of strife, a lot of uncertainty about the future of humanity. And in the United States, a group of individuals led in part by Columbia University faculty member James Cattell and others joined together to form what is called the American Association of University Professors. And several countries have such associations where the instructors at different institutions can participate in it's sort of a, if you will, a unified front about a number of different concerns that affect instructors. But the important point about this establishment of the AAUP is as follows. This is part of the Declaration of Principles from 1915. And in the context of this whole idea of academic freedom and the importance of academic tenure, and all of this is fine and good in terms of defining these points. But what's really important, in my opinion, is if you go on and read this document, it talks more and more and more about the responsibilities of individuals in their profession, in their position, their responsibilities to principals, to students, to ethical behavior, to integrity, and so on. This one, and so these are just excerpts that I pulled from this document. It's easily downloadable. It's only about 15 pages. It's a great read, but I have to interject, have to digress. One of the sad things, of course, about this document written in 1915 is you never see the word woman. And it is very, very, very science-oriented. That's not a bad thing, but in large part, the individuals who band together to form the AAUP actually came from the scientific community. It's unfortunate that it wasn't a little bit more diverse in its character of representation. I love this lower one here. For by its nature, the university is committed to the principle that knowledge should precede action. Can you imagine if that happened today? Sorry. Oh. If you're in the United States, it's kind of like this is on a daily basis. It's just, anyway. And then this lower point here, but also that it will with equal earnestness seek to maintain such standards of professional character and of scientific integrity and competency as shall it make a fit instrument for that service. The point is that you know, we tend to forget certain things like this in the sense of the importance of the position that we have and the importance of how we interact with our students and our colleagues. Oops. There have been a number of other subsequent discussions about science and the social order and our importance in terms of science and technology and democracies and how we move forward as a human race in a positive way. R.K. Merton's discussions are pretty impressive, in my opinion. These are just a set of sort of bulleted highlights that I pulled from his discussion. The ethos of science is that that effectively toned complex values and norms, which is held to be binding on the man of science. Again, you never see the word woman in here, and that's unfortunate, and that's history, and that's unfortunate. I love his comment about communism, The institutional conception of science as part of the public domain is liked with the imperative of communication of findings. If you think about it, this is 1945, and look what we're talking about right now in terms of open access for all scientific literature. Merton would, I guess, call that communism. Anyway, so I'm almost done. Solutions. I think that there are many, and a lot of organizations are taking a lot of really great steps to pay a lot more attention to of ethical behavior in science, responsible behavior in science, and so on. Organizations that are not, of course, just geocentric by any sense of the imagination, medical organizations, you name it, every single discipline, every single professional scientific society is paying much more attention to statements on ethical behavior, codes of conduct, and so on. And of course, the American Geophysical Union, in my opinion, is doing a very, very good job, great job, Geological Society of America. And of course, one cannot forget the tremendous efforts that have been going on by the IAPG. Speaking of, so I don't forget, you can sign up to be on their mailing list and get their regular newsletters that Sylvia and Giuseppe put together. So there's a lot of great activities that are going on. And for example, if you now are asked to review a manuscript for any professional geoscience journal or submit a manuscript to a professional journal, you're going to see the kinds of questions that I highlight in yellow here. Do you have any potential conflicts of interest? Do you detect plagiarism? Do you detect inappropriate self-citations? Do you have any other ethical concerns about this study? And by the same token, a lot of professional organizations in the context of awards to their members are paying very, very careful attention to making certain that these awards are given out under the appropriate circumstances and there's no unethical behavior buried by individuals who might be considered for awards, and so on. And for the students out there, you will read codes of conduct by various professional organizations like the Geological Society of America that are very, very and happily student-centric. We treat students and subordinates respectively without exploitation and provide a safe, supportive environment to encourage learning and professional development. We use legitimate, unbiased criteria when making decisions and taking actions that affect the work, educational, and/or professional opportunities of students, colleagues, and other professional contacts, and so on and so on and so on. This is good in my opinion. These are great steps forward. And not to end with or close with something of a negative note, but individuals do need to recognize that there are mechanisms for terminating faculty. Tenure be damned. There are direct mechanisms. And in fact, I've been involved in 2 examples of the termination process of individual faculty. It's not pleasant, but when it has to be done, it simply has to be done. And there are mechanisms. People are not protected. So with that, again, we'll go back to the great diagrams from Sylvia and Giuseppe's recent paper, just demonstrating and emphasizing just how this concept of geoethics can pervade so many different facets of human endeavor and human thought. And I'll close with one of my most favorite writers of all time, Nadine Gordimer, winner of a Nobel Prize for Literature, remarkable individual. Nadine spent her entire life in South Africa writing much about the apartheid circumstances and following. Truth isn't always beauty. Hunger for it is. So thanks very much. I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope I didn't go too far, go too overboard. I'm happy to provide this presentation to anyone. And again, thanks.